All right, I'm happy to continue the conversation with Scott Connor. You can find everything in the description. Dynasty and Chill podcast. Way smarter than me. Please, if you enjoy this channel, you're going to enjoy his stuff 10 times more. But before we get into it, you have to know that this video is brought by Underdog Fantasy. You've seen us drafting there every single day. I could not have more fun drafting on Underdog Fantasy, and I promise you that you will too. Just make sure you sign up with promo code FLOCK, and when you use promo code FLOCK, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. On top of this, you will get our 2022 Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. You'll get our Dynasty rankings. You'll get into drafts with us on the stream. You'll get into drafts in the public lobby with your friends. Go have some fun. Sign up with promo code FLOCK. And stick to the end of this video because it's probably one of the most useful videos you're going to find on this channel, and God knows how long. All right, we are going to talk about some Dynasty Fantasy Football trade strategy. I know so many people watching this have already heard Scott go through and talk about this on his own podcast, but I want to say you have probably been the leader in this particular move to take a wide receiver or a running back that the Dynasty Fantasy Football community is in consensus that they are 1 to 2 tiers higher than another player. And we pivot down knowing that the Dynasty Fantasy Football community is wrong a lot of the time, and we pick up additional assets on top of that. Perfect example would be in a live stream a couple days ago. Someone asked me, "Oh, Mason, do I trade T. Higgins and my 2023 first and second round pick for Justin Jefferson?" I said no. A lot of people didn't understand it. So I'm just going to toss this over to you. I would love for you to go through and talk about your process and exactly why you think that's the opposite trade that we should be making and why instead we should be looking to pivot down and move down tiers while accumulating other assets.
I love it. I love it. I love that you approach me with this topic because it's one of those things that I think it's kind of caught on a little bit. And I think this move is a little harder to make, but you're right. Like, we are wrong a lot on determining which players get steamed up and which players kind of fall back to the pack. We've had this way of elevating, especially really young receivers. I noticed this trend after 2020 was basically any receiver that had played their rookie year, that was an early declare, that had all the profile stuff, but also played their rookie year at like age 21, right? And they continued to smash like as a rookie, just as people would expect. Like, their value just explodes. And it's almost just this fallacy of, well, we probably started those players off fairly high already because of, where they started. And then we accelerated them even higher because of how they produced as rookies. But then there's just this assumption, well, this guy had X rookie season and he was wide receiver 20 as a rookie. And like, man, he can only get better. Like, he can only get, he has to get 20% better, right? Like, it might not be the fact that maybe he can get better as a player, but from a fantasy perspective, it doesn't mean he's going to rise up into that difference-making tier, which is really hard to achieve. And I think that my research has showed that to be a top 12 dynasty receiver in a given season, so just a top 12 finish, generally you have to have one of two things. And a lot of times the guys that finish there have both of these things. Obviously, you have to have targets. Like, it's very hard to do it with less than 140 targets. So if you just are saying, okay, I need to figure out where my tiers are, because I think that's where it's got to start. Like, if you're going to start sending out these trades, you need to be confident and don't worry about like whether your tiers are the same as Mason's or mine or whatever, but come up with a process. Like, if you have a tiers that you believe in, you're no worse or better at picking those tiers than you or I, right?
Yeah.
Come through, make your own tiers, but just remember these two things. Typically, you have to have like 140 targets or more. Like, just if you don't think the player can get there because of whatever you're looking at, your projections, whatever you're looking at to figure out projections or whatnot, think of that one thing, 140 targets. Maybe it's a little bit more because we have 17 games, but I still go off 16 game seasons because that's basically what fantasy is going to be. The second thing is, and this is a little more complex because it's people throw the word around, but they don't really have a number attached to it, is quarterback efficiency. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. Guys that get 140 or more targets and they're tied to at least like an average or above average efficiency quarterback. That's where your top 12 receivers are going to come from. So like, I'll throw out some names. I mean, I have my own like proprietary formula. I've taken 10 different numbers that I think make up like quarterback efficiency. And I've kind of put together, and I do this on my Patreon channel. I'll go through like where I see these tiers and stuff, but you can even look at like CPOA or CPOE or EPA per play, or even just basic stuff like passer rating, completion percentage, ADOT, YPA. Like you can look at all these things and just kind of come up with like who are the good quarterbacks and who aren't. And it's not a shock. Like the good quarterbacks are like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, like Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott. Like all these guys are efficient for their receivers, right? Then you have the guys like that are at the bottom that are not. And so just think of it this way. Like if I can tell myself that this guy's not going to get 140 targets and or this receiver is tied to a non-efficient quarterback, I don't care who it is. I don't care how high they're valued. I don't care what their current ADP is. It doesn't matter. So you're going to find some outliers where you're like, oh man, that guy, like I'll give you two examples, like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Like Tua Tagovailoa is not a good quarterback. He has not been efficient through 2 years. He's just not. Now, can he get better with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle? Yes. But what I'm saying, what my numbers are saying, and the bet that I'm making is Tua is not going to elevate either one of those guys. If anything, they're just going to be basically like status quo wide receiver twos. They're going to be like wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14, or something like that, which is fine. But if you can pivot off of one of those guys and get a guy that has a similar range of outcomes and pick up like a first round pick, ignore the name. Ignore Jalen Waddle's age. Ignore what he did last year. Ignore the fact that, well, he can just get better and better and better, and I'm missing out on the next Jerry Rice. Ignore that. Just bet on the fact that he's tied to an average at best quarterback. I mean, how many pivots can you think? I mean, maybe this was harder since they acquired Tyreek Hill, but that's the perfect one where even before that, I'm looking at Jalen Waddle going like, man, he's like wide receiver 5 in Dynasty.
Yeah.
And a lot of if I could just tell you what made up that wide receiver 5, what was a lot of his value? It was just he's a rookie and he can only get better, right? But really, did you really project him to be a top 5 receiver year after year after year? Or could you probably say that his value after year 1 was inflated, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you go and look at redraft markets, people are expecting Jalen Waddle's going to have a worse second season than he had last year. Last year, he had 100 receptions, and now you're getting him at the beginning of the 4th round in best ball.
And it might be too late on those two guys, but that's the idea where, and that's why I bring back to that guy that posts the warp charts. Like when you look at those warp charts for wide receiver, once it gets to like wide receiver 10 to wide receiver 30, 35, dude, it is flat as like Kansas. Like it's literally just flat. And then you have spike weeks here, and then you have some guys in that range that are way below, but it's basically just flat. And so I don't want to say that receivers don't matter in that range, but that's the sweet spot where you can make these pivot trades. Because obviously, if you're asking for a first round pick, you need to find the player in that range where people are willing to give up a first for already. Firsts are hard to get, especially 2023 first. Like there's a lot of receivers in that range. People won't even give you a 23 first for him, period. So if you go down to like a 24 first, like you could probably move Jalen Waddle and get back a lesser tier receiver that really has similar range of outcomes and get a 24 first on top of it. And you're just simply betting on the efficiency. It has nothing to really do with the targets because you can probably find another guy that's going to get 140 targets, but they're just maybe tied to a better quarterback, but their market value is not as high. So, I mean, that's the idea behind the pivot. It's finding the dead spot. You mentioned like Justin Jefferson down to T. Higgins in a 23 first. That's one where that's a tough deal for me because I actually think T. Higgins is a guy. I don't think he could finish like top 3. I wouldn't be shocked if he's a top 12 receiver, though. Like he's a guy that's tied to one of the efficiency kings. And I think you can probably project T. Higgins to get 140, 150 targets.
Yeah,
right?
just because the targets are so concentrated. In Cincinnati.
Exactly. So if I told you he's going to get 145 targets and he's got Joe Burrow for every game, I'm very confident in him finishing inside the top 12, top 10. He just may not finish wide receiver 1, but if he's going to finish wide receiver 8 or wide receiver 6, there's actually probably some profit to be made by still buying him at his price. And that's where if you could sell yourself on that, you could maybe argue pivoting off a guy like Jefferson. If it was the right first round pick, like it's probably got to be I wouldn't just blatantly make that deal without looking at where that team would be. Like I might zoom in on the first round pick a little bit more, but I think there's a chance where their range of outcomes are T. Higgins could be 85% of Justin Jefferson, 90% of Justin Jefferson. And I like Jefferson. The problem with Jefferson is him and Chase are valued so high, but man, they're going to probably get volume and they're tied to hyper efficient quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So like there really isn't a justification to move off of either one of those guys. So it's more of the issue of moving off of those guys versus vaulting T. Higgins up.
I mean, and going back to a couple things, this is something that I think I have failed with in years past, and I'm trying to get over it because I find myself still going out there and drafting guys like Garrett Wilson, drafting an Elijah Moore, like the players that I'm looking at the quarterback situation and saying, yeah, it's piss poor. I don't see how it really gets any better, but I really want to bet on the talents. And it's difficult to go through and really understand how, not the situation in the wide receivers you're playing alongside with, but the overall offensive environment, how critical that is to accessing real upside in fantasy football. Like if you go through and if you look at, like you're saying, I mean, cut it to top 10 wide receivers, they don't come for bad offenses. It doesn't matter if you're Terry McLaurin and you get 30% of the targets in Washington, you are capped. And if we go through, and I actually did this for a video on our redraft channel about a week ago, I went through and all I wanted to do with this video is I wanted to accomplish the fact that we were looking at touchdown rates, and I wanted to highlight to people that touchdown rate was volatile season to season. Obviously, you should fade Robert Tonyan in 2020. But my biggest takeaway with that video is if you wanted to get quote unquote lucky and say a touchdown rate is a lucky statistic compared to yards per route run, compared to targets per game, compared to target share, which is stickier season to season. If you wanted to quote unquote get lucky, you're not getting lucky. All you're doing is you're playing with a great quarterback. You're playing in a top 10 offense. Like I went through and I tracked the top 24 wide receivers with their touchdown rate, their touchdowns per target over there on RotoViz. And then I cross-referenced that, just very simple. I didn't even create a quarterback efficiency metric. If you just look at how many of those players come from top 10 offenses, it's over half by a wide margin. So I think that's kind of what you're speaking to. I would ask you for an example of this, going back to Waddle. Say Waddle's in that bad offense. Would you be willing to say pivot off of a Jalen Waddle for a wide receiver that's probably not nearly as talented, but he's playing in Kansas City? He has it in the range of outcomes to skyrocket in his own dynasty value if he hit his rookie season. Like, would you pivot off of Jalen Waddle for Sky Moore in a 2023 first?
Oh, easy. I was actually thinking a guy that's even lower. So two things. You ask a lot of, I love where you went with that topic because I think it speaks to, if you're stuck, you've drafted Garrett Wilson, you have Elijah. I have a team that has Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore. And you know what? It makes sense to do with that one team? I might as well go get Zach Wilson.
I've literally told people this every day. If you're already pot committed, like I made a video talking about how bad Zach Wilson was last week, and someone sent me a message saying, oh, I have Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson, and Elijah Moore. Should I go through and try to trade one of these guys? I'm like, no, you already made the bet that somehow he's good. You're already pot committed. You got to ride it.
Yep. And that's exactly the thing you have to be thinking of, especially if you're playing in 10, 12 leagues. You kind of got to look at your distribution of these players and say, well, I don't want to have zero Elijah Moore, or Zach Wilson, or Garrett Wilson. But it would actually make sense to have them all concentrated on like one or two teams because I'm either going down in flames with that situation or, I'm hoping that if Zach Wilson goes down in flames, at least the concentration is in a way where it's still going to keep the value of those other two receivers propped up enough to where maybe I can pivot off of somewhere else. But I was thinking when you mentioned the Jalen Waddle question, and that is why I think that a guy like Jalen Waddle isn't necessarily even worth a 23 first by himself. It's not. People are like, oh man, you wouldn't give up a 23 first for Jalen Waddle. In week 2, I might if I wanted a receiver. In May, no. There's no point. There's no point in giving up a 23 first for Jalen Waddle. The only thing I lose is maybe he won't be available in May or in August, but there's no point in giving that up right now, given how flexible that pick can be. But further ahead of that, like I was thinking, you mentioned Sky Moore in a first. That's a smash trade for me. Even if Sky Moore isn't good, you don't lose that trade by that much. Yeah. But I think a really interesting one that I've looked into more that I sold the hell out of, and now I'm actually interested in buying again. I think Hunter Renfro's in for a big season again. And it's because efficient quarterback, target concentration. I mean, you looked at the Raiders depth chart lately. It's like Adams, Renfro, Waller, and like Demarcus Robinson is our wide receiver 3, and I think, he's going to probably lose a little bit from last year, but I have a hard time looking at like Hunter Renfro doesn't get 18 to 20% market share. So like, I think literally Hunter Renfro can be 80% of Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill, and they're going to get their points in a totally different way. And he clearly doesn't have the upside. Like he's not going to probably give you multiple 40-point weeks, but if he ends up at like 90, 907 touchdowns or something like that, I wouldn't be shocked. And do the math. Like that's not that far off from what's probably going to end up being like wide receiver 15. So if you're looking for these pivots, Waddle's maybe a bad example because a lot of people value him really highly. But you get down a little bit further and you get down to some of these wide receiver 2s. Like if they announce, here's a perfect one. If they announce that Watson's going to play most of the season, say he's only gets suspended like 3 games or 4 games, like Amari Cooper is a perfect guy that I would pivot off of. And guys that I'm interested in buying are literally like the pivot when I barely can get the 23 first for the receiver. The pivot is to go after, especially, I mean, if you're in a league where it's like start 11 or start 12, right? Like where it's a little bit deeper. I'm looking at like Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers, Tyler Boyd. These types of players they have the efficiency going for them. They have at least a floor of where they're probably all going to get like 100 or more targets, right? But they also have like an injury away from maybe their volume going up 10 to 15%. But they're the throw in the trade.
Yeah.
If they are nothing but wide receiver 50, you don't really lose the trade because in theory, part of the bet on the 23 first is I have a chance that I could buy back a Jalen Waddle producer during the season for a 23 first.
Yeah.
And I can wait and see what happens. I can wait to see who survives like torn ACL season. I can wait to see who survives quarterback got hurt and is out for a month, like whoever it is. But I think I can almost buy back something really close to a Jalen Waddle or a Marquise Brown or something like that during the season. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot of outcomes with that trade that I can lose if I'm buying the player now, but I can really smash if I hit on a right combo or two.
Love the idea. I will say I'm trying to not have my lizard brain take over and scream that Hunter Renfrow is not good. I'm trying to contain myself. I love the idea. Like another example of this, a perfect example, go take Garrett Wilson, trade him for Tyler Boyd plus a pick. Like I've drafted Tyler Boyd everywhere. I don't want to get too focused in on the names because I know that's not the point.
They don't matter. I'm looking for
don't matter.
Mac Jones grades out very well in the efficiency department in terms of delivering the ball to his weapons.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is like their receiver room is just a cluster. Like their entire roster is a cluster. So it's really hard to depict, but there's probably going to be somebody that emerges. That's why I'm like, you know what? I'll bet on Jacoby Myers or whatever it might be. But that's literally like 5% of the trade. You know what I mean? That's it.
Yeah.
They're literally just a throw in. They're a placeholder. It's not adding. I mean, think about the difference between trading Rashad Bateman for a 23 first and Rashad Bateman for a 23 first and Jacoby Myers. I don't think the other manager that wants Bateman sees that value that different. You know what I mean?
I think the owner that sees Bateman, in his eyes, Myers isn't a part of the deal. It's a 2023 first for Bateman regardless.
Yep. And so I think you can ask for it. The worst thing they can do is say no, but you're losing a little of the leverage when you only do a 1-for-1. That's why I hate 1-for-1s. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, I always want to get the best player in the deal, or, you know, 1-for-1s are okay. A 1-for-1, if I make a 1-for-1 trade with you in anything, I'm now betting that I'm just getting the better side.
Yeah, you're betting that you're smarter than the other person.
I have no insurance. I have no insurance against outcomes that are out of my control. So there's very targeted spots in Dynasty every year, every position where you want to do a 2-for-1. Right? It's one of those, like, I always call it the 80-40 deal, where I look at this trade and I go, listen, this is a 90-30 deal. I'm giving you the asset that's worth $1. You're giving me the asset that's worth 90 cents. And you're also throwing me something that's worth 30 cents. I'm winning the trade in pure value, but that's not how fantasy works. Yeah. Normally you have to put one player in a roster spot, but there's a lot of outcomes where, like, I may need that 30 cents at some point, you know, and you just are subject to what happens with the $1, the one player. So you're not protected at all for injury. You're not protected at all for anything that could go awry that's out of your control. So there is always a spot for 2-for-1 deals. So I always like ask for that little piece back.
Yeah. Another example you brought up earlier was going through and trading J.K. Dobbins for Miles Sanders in a pick. Like if you're looking through the range of outcomes, there's one outcome where you lose and there are 10 outcomes where you win. Outcome A, the player you traded away, J.K. Dobbins, gets injured, gets replaced, or is bad. That's a possibility. It's not likely, but it's in the range of outcomes. Situation B, Miles Sanders is better than J.K. Dobbins. It's not likely, but it's in the range of outcomes. Situation C, that 2023 first, or maybe you had a pick swap, you traded them a second and they gave you a first back, ends up being the 106, and you bring in, God knows, Jackson, you bring in Jahmyr Gibbs, you bring in Jackson Smith and Jake, whoever falls there. And that player themselves ends up being better than J.K. Dobbins, which you traded away.
And then one more, D. J.K. Dobbins, I mean, so I looked at the running back WARP data and points per game over the last decade. if you're under 16 points per game, you're starting to get into that range of like, they're just week to week fillers.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a difference between 16 points per game and 13 points per game. But I look at a guy like J.K. Dobbins and I go, I am very confident that even if he hits his like 20th, top 20% range of outcomes, I have a hard time seeing him crack that 16 points per game, which gives me some comfort that, you know what, even if he ends up having a RB12 season and he's basically like Josh Jacobs or David Montgomery or a little bit better, he's still not really vaulting your team that much further ahead of my team. As long as I can fill in that quote unquote like RB2 spot on my roster, he's not really helping your win rate, if that makes sense.
No.
Sure, you're glad you got him. You're glad you got him. He's a solid RB2. He's RB10 on the season. I'm so glad I made that trade. But then you look at like what it Rotoviz and you look at like their win rate data, and it's like, dude, he didn't really help you win. He just helped you not have to fill your running back 2 spot with the same urgency that I have to do week to week. So that's it. So really, you still win the trade, but I also win the trade because you gave me what could be a premium asset. And then now I have 9 months to play with that 2023 first that could be the 106 or better. I now have a bunch of time to worry about what I'm going to spend that on. You have J.K. Dobbins. You have J.K. Dobbins at running back 12. You're probably happy with the deal, but I'm even more happy with the deal because you know what? I think I've found a way where I can come close to matching what I gave you, but I can do it with what we talked about in the first video, like a bunch of fillers. You know what I mean? I can find like patchwork running backs with my roster construction, and I'm still holding that first round pick. Like, and that's, I know we're not getting into 2023 picks, but man, you've seen the craze for the 2023 picks, right? Like, there's going to be deals that go down during the season and people are going to be like, dude, I'm sick of my team. I need 23 picks. And here's Travis Kelce in a 1.75 PPR league, and he's scoring 21 points per game. Here, I'll give him to you, even though your playoff pick's like likely going to be in the top 4 or 5 of the back end of the draft. Hey, take Travis Kelce. I want him off my roster. I need that 23 pick.
Yeah, that's what I talk about all the time. Like, people think that the time to buy veterans is now. They think because nobody's submitting a starting lineup, you're getting them cheap. No, there will be teams halfway through the season. There'll be teams by week 5 that thought they were going to be contenders that all of a sudden had 2 significant injuries and then are 1-4, and they realize that they're having a garage sale. And if you have 3 or 4 first-round picks, you're going to be the only guy they can go to because the other rebuilders will have the other first-round picks. They're not trading for veterans. So all of a sudden there's 1 to 2 teams failing. There are 1 to 2 contenders with actual draft picks. You dictate the price. They're not going to be able to hold on to Derrick Henry. They can't hold on to Travis Kelce because then they're just burning their team down.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it too, that the veteran running backs that everyone has already kind of operating on the fringes with, like, man, if I have like Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook on my roster, like, it feels great now, but you're going to go through that period where you look at it and you're like, man, if my team doesn't win, I'm stuck with this guy because I'm not even going to be. You're not going to be able to get a first for those guys next year. In March, you're trying to move Dalvin Cook for like the 108. People are going to laugh at you. You know what I mean? They're going to be looking at, man, there's going to be like 4 or 5 first-round quarterbacks, a couple running backs. Like, no way I'm giving you a pick for a 28-year-old running back. So I think you're going to see a market where people give those guys away during the season, and it's going to have to be the right team. It's going to have to be the desperate team. But you nailed it. If you have 3 first-round picks, what can you do with those first-round picks? You can look through them and go, you know what? I'm not giving you the one of that really crappy team that's going to be in the top 3. You know, I'll put this mid-tier one or my playoff pick on the block. I'm the only one you can get it from. And so ultimately, you know, you may get some of those deals may not get done, but my goal has been like, I want to try to get a couple first rounders in every league so I can filter through at the right times the ones I want to trade. Ideally, if I have 2 picks, 23 firsts in every league, I want to leave next year probably trading away 30% of those picks, but I want to trade away like at least 50% of my bad picks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like but when you only have your 1 pick and that's all you have, it's now tied to the performance of your team. So you're kind of making a little bit of a bad bet on yourself too. Like, you better win that trade. When you trade for Nick Chubb, he better not get hurt in week 6. Otherwise, you've just tanked your own team. You know, so there is some strategy with having multiple picks because you can look at the range of outcomes of all the teams with those picks.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Please plug anything you want to plug. Tell the people where they can find you. Like I said at the beginning in this intro, Scott's a lot smarter than me. So if you think these videos are good, I promise you what he puts out's better.
Yeah, man, it was great to catch up with you. We go way back. I mean, I think I was I don't know if I was the first guest on Flock Network, but it was back when you just started, and it's really cool to see what you've built it into, and that you're able to do this. Like, I know this was something that was really a passion of yours, and you never stopped grinding. You never stopped. You continue to put out content and improve. I mean, your production quality and your overall content is great. So I just want to give you kudos and appreciate you inviting me back. Dynasty and Chill. I'm just honestly, I would give up all the content creation and stuff to just play. Like, that's my passion, is just interacting, playing Dynasty, playing fantasy. But yeah, Dynasty and Chill, that's my podcast. I've purposely kept complete proprietary control over it over the years, where I do it whenever I want. I talk about whatever I want. I have on whoever I want. So it's really just kind of picking my brain. And then we have a huge Patreon channel that's grown almost to the point where I can't manage it at this point. But it's a lot of this stuff. Like, I'll put out these type of things, like these type of discussions. I'll just go and record a podcast. So that's probably where most of my content is. It's patreon.com/dynasty and chill. And then other things, I still write for DLF. I still do a couple shows on there. Do Dynasty Trades in 5, which is probably another, I mean, it's a competing YouTube show, I guess.
There's no such thing as competing.
There's not. But yeah, so just find me there at Charles Chill FFB on Twitter. But yeah, appreciate the platform, man. Good catching up.